So good afternoon, workshop attendees and our audience. Can fintech, video games, and philanthropic giving become the next gen of social innovation tools? Welcome all. So my name is workshop attendees, Adriana Ruiz. Our audience. Can fintech, video games, and philanthropic giving? My name is Adriana Ruiz. I'm Keep It Human's marketing executive. I will be leading the workshop today. We're going to start with Ricardo Climent with an overview of our aims and objectives for the session today. So, Ricardo.
Thank you, Adriana. It's a great pleasure to have all the invited guests here. Hope we have a good time and we learn something from each other. I'm sure we will. Just to let you know that this is a bit experimental. We've never done this session before, but I'm going to start introducing myself very briefly and maybe provide a context of where we are coming from, why we are meeting today, and hopefully we're trying to lead this session too. So I'm Ricardo Climent. I'm Professor of Interactive Music and Composition at the University of Manchester, and also founder at Keep It Human, which is a spin-out of the University of Manchester, started a year ago as part of the Aspect program. An Aspect is providing the framework, if you want, the context for us to exist today. Aspect is a platform, mostly from entrepreneurship and commercialization for social research, social sciences research. We are not exactly in the social sciences. We are in the humanities, and, music and so on. But I think social sciences, arts and humanities, everything is kind of at the same package. We are not the STEM subject. That's what I was trying to say. So it don't come from the sciences. The Keep It Human started a year ago as part of this accelerator program that they called Aspect Success 2020. This year is called ARC. And as a result of that, I became Aspect Fellow this year. So one of the missions we have is to tell the community that, especially the community in academia, that it's possible to just break a little bit your area of comfort and maybe take your research out there. So in places that can have a different impact to what we normally do in academia. So it's a journey that is complicated, but I think we sort of are learning as we speak. And I think I'm personally very, very enthusiastic about it. I'm sort of closing the circle of coming from many, many years of research into maybe testing this out in the real world to see not just how a new company can be created, but a social enterprise, a social venture that basically wants to create a better world. Sounds a bit strange, but that's the point. And I think because my research has been always connected to video gaming and immersive media environments, I found the potential to connect these games for good with the expertise I have. And I haven't done that on my own. I have a good team behind. So the purpose for today is just to continue with the mission we have as part of the social, Aspect Fellowship. We already have two events. One was at a conference organized by the Ionian University as part of the Eastern DC Festival. It's a large European project we're involved. So we're sort of telling glories about what Keep It Human has done already. And then another one was talking to students and academics at the Royal Conservatorio of Madrid. Is one of the most prestigious ones in Spain, if not the most. It's very similar to the kind of environment you studied and at the college in Manchester. And so we're talking to students, the benefits of thinking about how music and, we as entrepreneurs can become also do good things for not just create music, but also contribute to society in a different form. So the context for today was more to think about experimental tools, how to put together a team of people that haven't met before with different expertise, combining fintech, combining video gaming, music, foundations, machine learning, because we know some of you already have this expertise as well, and see what can we do to define in a focus space what will be potentially a new generation of social tools. And we will do that in the second part of the workshop. The workshop hopefully will have this sort of first part, 40, 45 minutes, talking about the things we do, talking about the things we worry about, and hopefully there will be different ones, but we may agree. And the second one will be more sort of practice-led exercise. So Adriana will present us with a case study, and then not necessarily based on the case study, but informed by it, maybe decide what sort of problem in the world we want to solve, and how do we go about it. So hopefully this workshop, this sandpit, could provide ideas for other academics and social entrepreneurs to lose the fear, just try new things and see how ideas respond in that particular context. So after this event, we have another one on the 29th. We are very fortunate to have 3 new speakers, including the Mina Cheung, including the Ruth from Impressive War, and our colleagues from Fronda in Mexico. And I will not anticipate much what we are going to talk about, but it's mostly about creating meaningful interventions. We will explain that more, but it's more looking at, the sciences have been doing really well in creating these enterprises and changing, disrupting markets and so on. What about the social sciences? What about the humanities? What about the arts? Do we have the strength? We have the language and the power to disrupt these things as well? And if so, how these interventions will not just disruption for money, but meaningful disruptions, meaning that we do something that is sustainable, or is something that is based on many years of expertise and research. So a lot of things to discuss, lots of things to think about. But I probably pass the button now on to Adriana to see who will be next to speak.
So we will be starting with an introduction of the workshop attendees. Can you please help me with your full name and what do you do, and a bit of your professional experience? So I will suggest we start with the ladies. How about starting with Aline?
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, my name is Alan Alvis. I founded Boston Games in 2019, and I've been, I love the gaming industry, and I love games that have a positive impact on society. So I do programming, I do articles, I do game reviews, and that's basically what I do now. I didn't really have an intro prepared.
Thank you very much. Jo?
Hi everyone, I'm Yee Cheung. I'm the director of the Olympias Music Foundation. We're a music education charity based in Manchester. We have 2 broad aims. The first is to increase access to music education for young people over a sustained period. So that's not just like one outreach event, but working with young people for many years. And then the second aim is to use music as a way to encourage community integration amongst diverse groups. So that's me. It's very nice to be here and meet you
all. Josh?
Yep, my name is Josh Goldie. I'm a PR consultant for Skyparlour, which is an award-winning fintech and payments PR agency based in central Manchester. We cover everything from the card machines you would pay for food and groceries at like Sainsbury's, all the way up to the security that protects people's card data, and even like different payment methods that you might want to use if you didn't want to use your card. I've also got a background in journalism, specifically in like games and media journalism, which is something I still do a bit on the freelance. So I'm very heavily into 2 separate industries that we can hopefully connect today in this little panel.
Thank you. Mayur?
Hi everyone, I'm Mayur Joshi. I'm a lecturer at Alliance Manchester Business School, the University of Manchester. My focus of research is generally fintech and other high-tech industries. My research examines how large incumbent firms, specifically banks, how they are grappling with, adoption and adaptation to digital innovations, which we are observing in the market. In terms of my teaching, I recently developed a course on fintech and analytics, which I'm going to offer in the next term. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To begin with, we start with a kind of general question. What kind of global problems do you personally worry about the most? Who would like to start? Anyone?
Yeah, I guess I can start. There's a lot of global problems I sometimes worry about, like stuff like climate change that affects everything. Days are noticeably getting hotter, and that's worrisome. And there are like a lot of things that individuals can do to sort of, fight back against it. Stuff like managing your water use and making sure you recycle. But really, is this something that a lot of like bigger companies should be trying to put more effort into, reducing their greenhouse gases and improving their carbon footprint, because that's where most of the damage is coming from. But then there are also much more personal global problems, such as the way the economy is, especially people my age right now. When it's not like when our parents were like in their mid-20s and had savings and could reasonably look towards buying a house or something like that. A lot of millennials, even like in the sort of middle class bracket, might be struggling to actually have proper savings and worrying more about pensions and their finances, a lot more than what I think the people from the generations above us had to deal with at our age. And this is just something you see more and more people worrying about as more people from the Generation Z start reaching adulthood. They start realizing all the stuff millennials realized years ago now. And I think this is a problem that is going to need sort of addressing soon, because I think it is something that affects a lot of people across the globe. And those are just two things that I'm personally worried about.
Next person.
I definitely agree with that. And I think something that video games can make an impact on that is kind of modeling for children behaviors that can be preventative. For instance, a game that I've been kind of developing for a while now is about a child who moves to a new neighborhood. And interactions include like talking to the NPC players, finding hidden objects, solving mysteries and things like that. But I think more importantly, the kind of things that we can implement into those games are simple things like the NPCs that live in the houses in the neighborhood, just put green technology in those houses, introduce new ideas of interacting and going to school, and the idea of how adults spend their time can be modeled in video games. And I think that can have a profound effect, especially with children as they grow up and remember those things. And as they become adults and be like, that'll already be in kind of the back of their head and kind of influence the way that they live their day-to-day life. So for me, I think it's tying back into what you said about people making changes in their day-to-day life that will have a real impact on the world. And that's something that I think would be really awesome to have video games make an impact on.
I can go next. So the problem that I care the most is related to society and sociology in general, and it's maybe not very physical in nature, very tangible in nature, but it's a problem that I think we as a society we have created. So what I care is about is increasingly what we see is that human beings, like we have for everything we do, we have developed specific best practices of doing the thing, getting the things done. And what I mean by that is, for example, when large banks, when they grant loans, they have this best practice of looking at the credit rating scores of the individuals who are applying for the loans, and based on those scores, then then they rate the individuals, and then they make a decision whether the person can get a loan or not. So there are almost always best practices for everything individuals as well as organizations do in the society. And my problem is that this best practices then become institutionalized in the social structure. And then eventually we forget to reflect on why we do what we do. And when we do that, it creates a situation where the inefficiencies in the past keep on reproducing themselves over and over again. So I'll give an example. So when I came to the UK from Canada after finishing my PhD, I found it strange that none of the banks in UK recognized my credit history from my bank accounts in Canada as well as India, and I have to start afresh from zero. And I don't need any credit right now, but I was just thinking and imagining the situation of people who might actually need, to get some mortgage or something, and what would it entail for them. So I think for me, the best, the largest problem that I intend to tackle is how we challenge the best practices that we think are best, and how we overcome them limitations and inefficiencies that we have integrated in our systems.
I can chip in a little bit. It's really interesting hearing all of the things that you've identified. I feel that there's a common theme here, which is to do with long-term impact and change. At least for me, so in the context of where I work, that's to do with young people. I think a lot of these concerns that we have, whether they're about climate change, children's behavior, or inefficiencies in the system, there's always a short-term kind of solution, or a number of short-term solutions, and then sort of the longer-term solution. And the people, of course, that those longer-term problems and solutions impact are young people, because a child who's 10 now is the Gen X 20-year-old who is living in a world where, I don't know, guns are allowed, or they can't get a loan on a house, or they all of these are affected by climate change, can't get AC in their house, and it's too hot now to be bearable to live in. So I think one of the things that worries me is that a lot of the interventions that I'm seeing are very, very short term. They tackle an immediate problem, but ultimately are just flushing money down the toilet, because they're not really looking ahead to what the bigger problems are. And I suppose, as part of that sort of long-term planning and the solutions that we're trying to create, whether that's, embedding good messages in, say, video games for young people, or it's trying to use video gaming or fintech to create sustainable forms of income for social enterprises, that all of that needs to be thinking up 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, but 10 years ahead, and making sure that there's sufficient resources to support the growth and development of those solutions, and not just doing the easy thing all the time, which ultimately is a waste of money and isn't going to create the impact that I think we are all hoping to see reflected in a better world that we're working towards.
Probably my turn, no one left. I'm pretty amazed that, coming from so many different perspectives, angles, and expertises, we sort of have a common thinking in many, many different things already. We just started the workshop. I think if you let me, Adriana, my answer will be a bit cheeky, if not disruptive, meaning that I don't really care about what I care anymore. I'm sort of thinking, I just changed my perspective a few years ago, and I'm starting to think more about what other people think, and this is what I care about. Probably this happens when you become a father, I don't know, when you have a family, have kids, but meaning that I've seen in young people what I was missing when I was younger. Probably my generation, people were less aware of things, less aware of this problem, big problems we're talking about, because we didn't have access to that information. So it's not blaming my generation for that. But as years progress, I've been learning from even my own students that when we go for a pizza in a restaurant or something, they actually check where all these ingredients are coming from. How many they have cow emissions. I don't know when they get the list, but they actually have a very conscious, clear understanding of the things they care about. And one of them, of course, is climate change and also the green. And I think I didn't have the opportunity when I was younger, and I think I admire that. But in reflection, what happens when we try to implement the solutions, which I think is probably the next question, is that most people in the space are trying to create more awareness about these things. Maybe young people don't need more awareness. What they need is solutions. They need is to have the right tools to close this gap between the things they really care and the actions. So they don't need to check every time they order a pizza whether the ingredients produce carbon or whether they travel the world just to be on your plate. So meaning that it's not that I don't care about things. I care about what younger people and younger generations care about. I want to know what they care about because I want to work on the solutions, not the solutions to solve the problems, but the solutions to make these tools more accessible to them. If that makes sense. And this connects with more or less everything you just said.
Thank you, Ricardo. So next question. What are the most disruptive changes you have witnessed in the last 10 years in your field?
Can I just clarify, when you say disruptive, do you mean positive or negative disruptions?
It can be, yeah, positive or negative, that have generated some change, perhaps. New ways to do things, new tools to do things.
Well, I can go first again on this one. And this one was slightly longer than 10 years ago, than the last 10 years, a bit longer than that. But unarguably, open banking and the introduction of that has been probably the most disruptive thing in the finance and banking and fintech industry, because it's just allowed for the rise of so much more fintechs and payment options and various other technologies. Like prior to the financial crash in 2008, pretty much all the big banks were the big banks like Barclays and Lloyds and HSBC. But nowadays, over the last 10 years, we've had the likes of Monzo and Starling and Synergy Bank and all these other sort of startup fintechs challenging the traditional players at banking and providing many more options. Digital banks in particular are very convenient for people. You no longer have to go into your whatever banking like house you've registered to make any changes. You don't have to go to an ATM to take money out anymore. You can do everything through mobile apps now. Like the opening of banking, hence the name, is what really allowed companies to be able to do this. It gave them access to financial data that could facilitate innovation. And it keeps going on, even over the last year under the lockdown. In order to meet the changing environment, a lot of fintechs have been setting up different like new technology in order to meet the changes that customers are facing. Like Starling Bank, I believe they did this connected card, which would allow you to sort of set up a I don't know what the right term would be. Like you'd have your main payments card, and then you'd have like a side card that you could give to friends and family so that they could pay for your groceries on your behalf with your money, but you won't have to give them your card, and you could put a certain amount of money on it, like a prepaid card, and stuff like this, which allowed people to essentially do groceries for other people, like the more vulnerable people who had to remain inside because of the threat of the virus. And this sort of technology is just continuing to innovate in the fintech space and making it easier for people to feel not only included financially, but also just educate people more on finance and introduce it to them at a younger age. Like when I was growing up, I got a bank at Barclays when I was like a teenager. And then I didn't really think about it at all until I was in college, where I set up a savings account and but then again, didn't think about it anymore. And that's part of that is just because of the inconvenience of everything. It was just easier to let it run its course. But now with how many options there are out there, how many more payment options there are, people have to think about it a bit more. And that means people are getting more financially educated, which is a very useful skill, as it turns out. It's something they don't teach in school, and they almost certainly should, considering how much you need it for like the rest of your life, this sort of knowledge. But this is all stuff that has been changing a lot in the last 10 years. I almost want to say that the last 10 years of the fintech space has been the most innovative and most forward-thinking and rapidly changing that this industry has ever seen for people. And I think if it keeps going like this, it can have like a major effect on helping out on some of these global issues that everyone is facing. There's a lot that can still be done here, and there are companies out there that are doing it, I think.
I think I can follow up on what Josh just said, because most of the things I wanted to say, he has already covered. but I would like to add a few nuances. So what I have been observing is that over the last decade and even more, what we have seen is that there have been some global events which have fueled the already increasing digitization across the globe. So if you think of the events like demonetization policy in India back in 2016, where the government removed large value currency notes from circulation and replaced with a fresh currency, or if you think of the global pandemic like COVID, what we are seeing is increasing adoption of digital currencies for doing everything that we used to do before in the physical environment, and which means that this digitization is not only impacting the banking and finance industry, but all other industries, and the fintech is at a unique space where they need to contribute to all the developments happening in the surrounding industries. So that was one thing I wanted to highlight, is the large scale digitization. Another thing I wanted to highlight is that the boundaries between industries are also blurring. So if you think of banking industry like in 2007-8 and the banking and fintech industry now, so the whole lot of new players have entered the industry. A couple of I would say sometime in 2016 or 17, I heard one of the chief executive of one of the large banks saying that they don't worry about fintech startups entering the banking industry, but what they worry about is what happens if the large high-tech firms enter the industry. And that's no more a worry. What we have seen is that the Apples and Facebooks and Googles of the world have already started entering the banking industry. So, which is a huge change. So on the one side, we are seeing a democratization of banking industry where there is more and more competition, more and more options for the consumers, more and more technological developments. And on the other side, I'm also seeing a trend which is now making inroads, is that large technology firms are entering the space, and there is going to be some consolidation in the future. But my hope is that the consolidation will still be in favor of the consumers and less in the favor of the large firms, which remains to be seen.
So we have Ricardo or Joshi, who wants to go next?
Why me? You don't want me to wait to until I have information from everybody, which is the easiest part. I think in my case, because I come from composition and computer music in particular, anything we've seen, it doesn't have the same level of disruption. And as you suggested, for good and for bad, I mean, fintech is for me has been one of the most brutal areas of change, alongside artificial intelligence and machine learning, because it's in everybody's lives, even if we don't know about it. And in education, I've seen the speed of computation I moved to the UK in the mid-90s when computers were starting to be real time. Although they were still not accessible for normal people, we had these sort of research centers that we can use these very fast computers. So I was actually starting to think about what this new technology can do for me. You know, write a piece for violin. Okay, what else can I do? You know, I can process the sound of the violin in real time. And this created a whole collection of new thinking, of course, new repertoire and so on, but disrupted entirely the way we taught music, the way performers perform music and understand music on the stage, the human-computer interaction that I was seeing, like, you know, this kind of horrible connection between a keyboard and a human in front of a screen. It was something that was becoming more artistic. And then we've seen sequential changes in these technologies, making real-time computation as like the tool to create new thinking for composers. And so the second one has been the accessibility of all the game engine technology. Started with Blender when they had this sort of small game engine attached, but then Unreal Tournament, now Unreal Engine, Unity, and so on. So all these technologies were only for people like, you know, computer scientists like Alin, or people that have studied programming. Being in music has always been very hard to teach these technologies because, you know, musicians are smart people, they're very well organized, they're creative, but they don't do programming. So what these technologies have done is to facilitate that, creating visual-oriented programming, block by block connections of signal processing, and has opened an immense disruption to the way we you know, students think about creative art. Just to give you, just to complete an example of one of my teaching this semester was on, we were teaching interactive tools with Unreal Engine. And one of the exercises, because of the pandemic, not everybody could do the practice-led exercise. So some of them had to opt for an essay connected to the technology. So the question was, if you were to present a pitch or in front of social tech for money, to build a game connected to a social cause, how would you go about it? Who will be the person you will associate with? What will be the game about? Who will be the beneficiary? You will not believe the level of thinking and the level of connections between pieces of work that actually quite hard even for myself. So, meaning that this has provided, these technologies in real time have provided not just innovation in creative arts, but also in education, making students to be sharper and then leave the areas of comfort. Think about musicians 20 years ago aiming just to play in orchestras, and musicians nowadays, they can do anything. That's what I think. You know, maybe they don't think that much, that they can go that far, but I really believe that musicians are prepared to get any job today.
Joshi?
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting. As I said, just a disclaimer, I mean, you know this already from my biog, but I don't have any expertise in fintech or music technology or video gaming. So I'm really just speaking to the context that I work in. Although, you know, clearly all of the things that you're saying, there's clearly an ecology here. Everything seems to be linked up. For me, the bigger sort of disruption. So I'm gonna structure mine into good ones and bad ones, just because I think, you know, it's interesting to see both sides of the coin here. So one of the things about, and again, I'm not so much talking about, you know, fintech necessarily, just about sort of technological advances generally. I think there's an element of it which is on one hand very ostracizing. So for a lot of people who maybe struggle to sort of access online banking, you know, data poverty, a lot of these things are a barrier or an obstacle. And on the other hand, there is something about technology which is extremely democratizing. So, you know, we do a lot of feedback and evaluation meetings with our user groups, but we also have, you know, our trustees there, and those are people. One of our trustees is the vice president of Barclays, and you have that person sat next to like a Pakistani lady from Longside who doesn't speak English, and you have them side by side on Zoom, and those people are completely equal. You know, in this context. And I think as well, you know, with video gaming, it does a very similar thing. I think that when you're playing a video game, you're all the same icon, right? Or you can sort of change your avatar or something, but you suddenly all of those sort of identity issues which maybe affect you in real life go away. So on one hand, it's a bit of a struggle. I think certainly, my parents, it took them I mean, when I was growing up, we didn't have a computer. It was very exciting when we got our first like massive box thing like in the 90s, and to see kind of how far we are now. Most of my meetings and interactions, most of my work happens on a computer. It's horrifying when you see your screen time report, especially during the lockdown, and we've become very, very reliant on all of these things, whether that's using Zoom, or it's using online banking, or it's video gaming in our free time, or using Netflix and things. So on one hand, I think that one of the things that we need to sort of be balancing in these disruptions is how we can turn some of these sort of more negative aspects of technological advancement into becoming positive, and making sure that people aren't shut out as these things continue to progress, and that all of these things are working to the benefit of societies and communities. That's my 10 cents.
Thank you. I think you have, sorry?
I think Aline.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of what the most disruptive thing in the gaming industry. I think it's pretty much the opportunity that's arisen in the past 8 years or so with services like Steam, or just the globalization of internet. It's not just Nintendo and PlayStation and Atari that can present these new games and ideas to people. Now, regular people like me could be an indie developer and put a game up on Steam and have, the opportunity to have hundreds or millions of people use it. So I think something that I kind of heard from everybody in bits and pieces is the fact that we're going towards globalization. And part of that, whether you're in fintech, agriculture, the gaming industry, I think that kind of gives the new generation a bit of a challenge to make these global maxims when they're presenting new ideas, creating new businesses. And I think that's the kind of disruption that might take a generation or two to work out, honestly, because we're still coming together and figuring those things out as humans. I mean, this pandemic was a perfect example of, the UN attempting to come together and trying to do these global policies and take care of the pandemic on a global level. And I think we're going to start to see that with businesses as well, like things that are, general practices in America or the UK or China. Like was mentioned with the banks earlier, where a credit report from Canada is not acceptable in the UK. And I think we're going to start to see a lot of that be resolved. So I'm pretty excited about that.
So yes, I think as I was mentioning, I think you covered a lot of these ideas for the next question, but anyone has anything else to say in terms of what opportunities might these disruptive changes create with regard to addressing global problems? Or you feel we have covered all the topics?
Could you just repeat that question one more time? I think my
Yes. What opportunities might these disruptive changes create with regard to addressing global problems?
Mm-hmm. Well, I touched upon it a bit earlier when I was talking about how fintech is changing and impacting people's lives, but there are like both major and minor things that has been happening in this industry to affect stuff. So like you wouldn't think fintech would have a major effect on, say, global warming, but a big thing that's sort of coming into its own over the last few years are like greener cards, like greener payment cards. So instead of having plastic for everything, now you can get like wooden cards that are a bit more environmentally friendly, or disposable cards that are recyclable or biodegradable. Elements like this are also being introduced to try and cut back on the amount of waste being produced. And then, of course, the shift to digital as well, obviously solves quite a few global issues when it comes to waste. Not that digital still has some forms of waste, but it's different from from the creation of like greenhouse gases that are sort of happening like previously, having to make so much we use up so much plastic and all that. So you would, even if it doesn't feel like it's a something that fintech would solve, there is probably someone out there doing something to try and fix that global issue. I think if it was to talk about like a hurdle that is being facing, I think Joey brought it up earlier, but like the financial inclusion aspect of fintech is something that we're still sort of tackling quite majorly, because not everyone is like open to the idea of digital banking. They either through simply not understanding it or not trusting it, or just general fears about it. And there are also some people who just simply can't access it, like someone in their 60s who lives out in the middle of the countryside where the internet is pretty low, probably isn't the most computer savvy or isn't the most digital savvy, and so prefers to use what they've always been using, which would be like cash, which of course is a slight problem when we're all sort of moving towards a cashless society as everything moves over to digital. And that's something that still needs to be like properly addressed. And you have places like the Inclusion Foundation trying to solve these issues for people. But once we get over that kind of hurdle, I think many more changes around sort of extreme poverty and just trying to make the quality of life better for everyone. I think that fintech has the opportunity to sort of solve that.
Just to sort of add to that, I think that's a really key point about like the cashless society and things. I'll give you an example. So my grandmother is completely illiterate, so she doesn't read or write in either English or in Chinese, and she's still very much of that generation who grew up in the war. So she keeps all of her cash under the mattress. And we got to a point where, you know, they changed from the paper money to the plastic one. She just had loads and loads and loads of like paper money, but the only way we can change it is if we went to London, to the Bank of London, and gave it it's not worth anything.
a big track there.
Exactly, yeah. And you know, so again, I think it's this thing about, you know, the pros and cons and who are the winners and who are the losers, and how do we try and bring everybody along with these advancements and you know, I think the other issue as well with sort of globalization is language. I mean, there's an assumption here that we are all going to speak English, or that all of these technologies are going to be in a single language. And of course, language is a really important thing because it changes how you think. I mean, in China, for instance, you know, during the Cultural Revolution, we switched from having, you know, lots and lots of different dialects to everybody speaking Mandarin and having simplified Chinese. And what that does is it means that everyone's thinking in the same way. So the assumption that all of this technology, all of this digital, we have an imagined community, a global community online now, that we're all expected to engage with it in the same way. And that, you know, I suppose it's partly that sort of thing about, you know, treating people as individuals and then treating people as a sort of sample of people and seeing what, the majority always wins. But when you're talking about a minority of 30%, when you're talking about several million or billion people, that's a lot of people who are having to change in order to fit with this new model of society, which engages online, which maybe uses online banking or fintech rather than going to the bank, which doesn't speak English, which maybe doesn't have the same cultural norms. And I think there are a lot of unresolved issues here and questions about who it is who's directing these changes. You know, because if it's it feels, you know, at the moment, a lot of what's happening feels very top down. And of course, you know, banks and things, finance companies have a responsibility to sort of look at the data and see what the patterns are. But you're never going to have a situation where it's skewed so strongly towards one side that there isn't a significant minority of people who are disenfranchised by those changes.
I can add to that a little bit. So the cashless society is definitely a very controversial topic, and there are both sides of it. But I wanted to try and maybe help us think something more abstract manner, where I would like to say that all the digital technologies can be thought of as two-sided swords. So technologies can help us solve some of the problems, but they might inadvertently bring some different set of problems as well in the society. So if we think of, for example, if we think of the credit rating scores, the example that I gave earlier, so what we have seen is over last decade is that what constitutes data has been changing. So all the social interactions that we have in general beyond our interactions with the banks are now being captured in one form or the other, and it can be used as data sources. So alternative data can help us do away with the problem of credit rating. So for example, if I never had a credit history, but if they can be corroborated from my other social behaviors, they can predict my credit worthiness through different data sources, and they can still grant me credit, right? So that's the plus side of it. But the negative side of it is that this way of granting credit would only be accessible to people who are active on social media. So people who are not active on social media, whose data are not available through all these alternative sources, would still be excluded from this model. So what I'm trying to say is what we need to do is carefully understand like what we are prioritizing and what segments of the of individuals we might be excluding systematically by adopting a particular technology. Yeah.
Aline, do you want to go first, or should I?
I'll let you go this time. I need one more minute.
Okay. So I think in my case, the disruption in computation and music, as I was explaining, the problem I see is that as a musician, we don't see much of an impact in the real world to solve these issues. And I think you can also think of this mental barrier in many different places. So you think, okay, what I do is not important enough for me to solve poverty or things like that. And I think this is something that I've been fighting myself, because this is wrong thinking. This is what we are, and then I think we need to change this mentality to say, well, I know I am in music, I'm an artist and so on, but actually, what do? I don't know, I compose music. What is in the language of music? Well, the language of music is the most important vehicle for humans to communicate without words. So you're always talking about different languages here. We have many different nationalities and probably modern languages here. But if we play a melody or some music, we have something in common, because music has this language that can communicate the narrative, whichever the narrative is. So normally I always underestimate the power of what I do. And when we started Keep It Human, we sort of twisted that concept to say, listen, regardless of what you do, even if you think it's small, apply the social sciences, apply the social innovation in something you can achieve. So instead of starting with a big organization, we started with small skate park in Mozambique. We created something from the beginning to the very end. And we totally identify who were the beneficiaries, people that were helping. We created the experience. And then is when I clicked and said, listen, this can be scaled. So even if you think that you cannot solve huge problems in the world, every little help, every contribution that might have alongside others can put this team together that can actually solve major issues. And I still don't know how to do that, probably with the help of many friends. But that's what I think about the disruption. So lack of confidence can become also a weapon to change completely your thinking, and start with the small and test your ideas.
And Ali, would you like to add something?
Let's see, I think to kind of add on to that, I think the same could be said for a lot of different indie gamers who think that their games might not have an impact on somebody. For instance, like Timby World, small game, not affiliated with PlayStation or Atari or Nintendo or anything like that. But now in this age, it can reach out to all kinds of different people, can get all kinds of different ideas out there. So I think the idea of inclusion. sorry, I'm trying to formulate. I have an idea in my head that I'm trying to articulate. So I think what I'm trying to say is basically in the gaming industry, the disruption of everyone being able to be more included in the gaming industry.
I think one problem in the game industry, if I can continue with this, Aline, as well, is that the perception of gaming in itself is a big problem, just to start. So to use that to convince young people to do good is, before solving this thing, we have to maybe change the perception that video gaming for young people only do bad things, that all the games are the same. It's about killing or it's about this. I mean, video gaming is demonstrated that provide plenty of different skills for many, many different things. But we still need to remind people that this is the case, you know, in terms of skills, team building, working in a collaborative environment, in an emotional environment.
There's a huge opportunity to change that stigma, because currently, you know, it's kind of common knowledge among parents that shooting games and games of violence will have possibly negative effects on kids, but there's so many more positive implications that could be taken from games, as well as positive social interaction, positive behavior modeling, like mentioned earlier, with positive behaviors being modeled in gaming, and visual spatial skills with VR, even physical health with exercise and nutrition. It's pretty cool.
So going to our next section, we have a case study to invent a digital solution to a global problem, which I hope will give us some ideas for the task that we're going to do all together. So the case study is Ant Forest by Alipay. It's an app that has won a UN Champions of the Earth award, promoting green lifestyle. And it's very interesting because it focuses on changing behavior through the app to get translate this into rewards. But these rewards are not limited to something virtual, rather they have an impact in the real world. So we're going to start with, I'm going to start by sharing a video of what it is about. Can you see the video screen?
Yep.
Okay.
What does this tree planting event on Earth Day have to do with this? Would you believe the use of this app is encouraging people to reduce their carbon footprint and resulting in the planting of millions of trees throughout China? This is called Ant Forest. It's a mini program embedded in China's most popular mobile payment platform, Alipay.
I use my Alipay multiple times a day to pay for everything from buying food to paying for the taxi and my utility bills. It's a part of people's daily lives in China.
That's why Ant Financial, the parent company of Alipay, wanted to use this popular app to engage their users to adopt a greener lifestyle while helping to better the environment. The result was Alipay Ant Forest, created in 2016. So how does it work? If I conduct a low-carbon activity in my daily life, such as walking to work instead of driving, recycling my old clothes and TV on Caval's secondhand marketplace, Idle Fish, and biking to get around. These low-carbon activities translate into green energy points within the Alipay Ant Forest. For example, each utility bill payment made through Alipay can generate 262 grams of green energy, while taking the bus earns 80 grams for each ride. The total energy collected is shown on the top right. At least 17,900 grams of energy is needed to grow a virtual tree in the app. The more green energy you have, the wider the variety of trees you can plant. Once you plant a virtual tree, a real one will be planted by Alipay Ant Forest and its philanthropic partners. To date, 500 million people have joined Alipay Ant Forest, and the program has resulted in the planting of 100 million trees in arid areas throughout China. Combined, they cover nearly 933 square kilometers. And that's the equivalent of more than 130,000 soccer fields. Alipay Ant Forest also has some fun elements. People can track their trees in real time on the app via satellite images. Friends can use their Alipay to steal each other's energy. They can also pool their energy points together and plant bigger trees. Alipay Ant Forest says it's developing new ways to inspire even more people to get involved, to make every day an Earth Day.
I'm not sure about this part, stealing other people's energy. It's very cheeky.
There's some friendly competition between people. Encouraging.
But that's not a game, right, Adriana? This is an app.
This is an app. Yes.
It's a gamified app.
If I said game, I'm really sorry. It was an app. So we have created with Ricardo a little kind of summary of some of the important aspects of this technology. So we might use these items for the following task if you find them useful or not. You can add, remove items as you wish. So with the ant forest, we had a problem, which was global warming. They needed an action. There was an action needed to reduce carbon footprint. And the solution they found for this was an app that reward users for using eco-transport. The impact users plant trees in the app plants them in the real world. And I think there is always issues when on this part. I think the validation part is really important, to focus on the traceability of these actions that we're doing that are virtual. Is that the validation, in this case they use for the users, was that they can see a satellite image of the area where they're planting the trees. Joshi wants to say something. Yes? Yes, go ahead.
Hey, sorry. I just wondered, just for me, just to clarify. So how is the money generated? So it costs money, obviously, to install eco-transport. And then obviously it costs money to plant the trees. So at what point is money being generated to support those two activities?
As far as I understand, yes, there is a percentage between the users when they're paying for things, and then Alipay pays for these trees to be planted.
I mean, it's a bigger question than that, I think, because first of all, we need to ask, why are they doing that? Do they really want to save the planet? Or do they want to increase the visibility of their brand, saying, listen, we are not just another bank and not just another payments solution, not like so many. I mean, Josh was refreshing us about the huge amount of solutions that we have now in the financial market, and Mayur as well. So they probably want to increase this brand visibility, becoming greener. But on the other hand, it's a bit of an unfair example, I have to say, Adriana, because this is like, I mean, Alibaba and Alipay is the financial branch. You're talking about people like Amazon, like, huge corporations with hundreds of millions of users. So the solution at scale they're providing is like not something we can achieve, right? But maybe it's interesting to see that they're putting all their resources, because they not only do they sell goods, they have transport, buses, cinemas. they put all the resources at their disposal for people to change their mind and say, listen, if you use our resources more, rather than just all the resources, then we do something for good. We plant trees, not just the virtual, real ones. So, meaning that actually it probably answers, I'm just speculating, but it answers Joe's question in the sense that they're generating more revenue for their own company because people are using more of their own services. So in a way that it's an ecosystem that helps because they increase the revenue through the more use of the products, and they increase the brand because they say, listen, we are not just any other banking. We care about the world. And you compare that with what Amazon is doing, you can still pay Amazon services online. I think you say, I can't remember exactly, you search on charity.amazon or something, they take like 5% or 2% goes to charity, but you don't decide anything. Okay, you don't even know what's the impact of that. This one is very smart because you collect the energy, you plant this tree, you can go on the satellite and see actually the real tree. Whereas when you see most people trying to impact in this idea of creating awareness we're talking about, it's only in the perception of people's minds. These guys are going the extra mile. Because what I was told, I was talking about this with one of our PhDs, Hansuo Fan, that actually has all of our Chinese students have this app. But he was telling me that actually in Shanghai, they can see the breeze coming from the west coming now in the very hot days because the wind is blowing from this desertic part. And the 100 million trees they plant, they're already creating a climate change towards the city. It gets extremely hot. So people can perceive the changes, not only like we have a better world and it's a greener planet. Actually, today is 2 degrees cooler. And probably in Shanghai, where 40 degrees or 45, or Spain, these countries with very hot climate, they can actually perceive the actions that they do, even if they are very small. So, and it's not a game, it's just an app, right? But I think that it's not just any other app. It's kind of very disruptive in the way they thought about it. I mean, just to put some framework or some answer to your question, because I think it was a very interesting one. Who pays for it?
And I can add a little bit to it, is that most large organizations have been increasingly feeling the pressure of being socially responsible, and they need to allocate large amount of funds to CSR activities. And I think this is one way to do it, where you are on the one side doing a CSR activity, but at the other side you are benefiting from it. More the CSR you do, the more profits you make, because more and more people are using your app and using your channels to make payments and so on and so forth. So it's a very clever idea. And I think I would echo what Ricardo was just saying, is that I think what I found unique in this idea is connecting the digital and the physical world, because many of the ideas, they remain in the digital world, and that's why I think we fail to see the real impact. But if you bring your ideas to the real world, when they are actually planting a tree in the real world, not only the digital tree which is being shown in the app, I think this end-to-end solution makes it a very unique proposition.
But just to chase the money again a little bit here, I feel like, just go back to Ricardo's point about boosting an image. I feel like there's two different ways that this could work, from a money generating point of view. So as an arts organization, there's a big focus this year. Arts Council England, who obviously the biggest funder of arts organizations, so they fund like the British Museum, but they also fund, say, I don't know, like an arts project by a student at Manchester University. They also fund the OMF. One of the things that they've outlined in their current 10-year strategy, which is called Let's Create, is that they will prioritize funding bids that can demonstrate that they are doing a project which is very eco-friendly and is sustainable. And that's particularly pertinent for places like theatres, where there's a lot of production costs and you're buying a lot of equipment, or you need a lot of transport, and then it all gets thrown in the bin after the show's done. Say you do an opera, you put it on for 3 nights, and you've just asked for like £300,000 worth of production, and where does all that go? You've got to store it somewhere, you've got to transport it somewhere, so on and so forth. So in those instances, the people who are making the decision about whether or not to be eco-friendly or to make a change are not the arts organizations. They are having to pander to a bigger organization who is setting the agenda there. So it's very top down. I mean, it's great. I mean, that the Arts Council are now saying that we're only going to fund your project if you can demonstrate there's no waste here. But it's not the arts organization who's making the decision. And in the case of something like Alibaba or Amazon, so I think Manos put in the chat about Amazon Smile. So OMF use Amazon Smile. It's great because, I mean, it's hard, we only get like £5 a month, but essentially if you buy something, and I'm not trying to market here, advertise it. If you go on Amazon, make sure that you choose Olympias Music Foundation as your charity. But everything that genuinely wasn't like trying to, but if you want to, it's a good idea. If you select the OMF as your charity, then we get something like 2% of what you spend if you spend it through Amazon Smile. Thumbs up from Anna. Yeah, but again, in that case, that's really a branding exercise, isn't it, from Amazon, because the money that they're paying is probably, again, I don't know who put it in, but probably tax relief, correct? Because charitable donations are obviously tax-free. So I think, again, I think it's important to ask the question of where this money is coming from and what the motivation for spending it is. And I'd like to be shown otherwise. I don't know if it's just me being left-wing and skeptical, but I would like to see a capitalist profit-making version of this, where there isn't either someone else forcing that decision to be made, say the UN, or some other sort of governing body, one where a company actually makes a decision to do something which isn't necessarily, I mean, it's no problem if it enhances your brand, no problem at all, but that the sole motivation is genuinely that if there wasn't kind of a positive for them in terms of branding, that they would still do that social innovation, that they would still cause that disruption, and they would still focus on sort of the long-term change without, as I say, the money incentive for them coming back. Does that make sense? So I wonder.
Yeah, but I didn't fully understand. So do you mean you're trying to say that the social agenda, the social responsibility agenda is given by these bodies, like the Arts Council, the government, the UN, and then we all have to fill the bills to tick the boxes to demonstrate, to validate the model. And then you're proposing something that it really comes sort of more bottom up, like for example, video gamers, or crowdfunding decide what sort of things they want to change, right? Is that what you were suggesting, or it's not like a bottom down approach, but more sort of like a top down, bottom up?
I don't know if it's maybe just like if it's a consumer buyer, maybe, but I would like to see a company that does it not for monetary gain, but does it that sets their own agenda, that doesn't have to be forced by another governing body to do it, because otherwise they won't receive their funding, they won't get their tax relief, they won't get whatever it is, that they make a decision. I mean, an example of a company, this isn't tech necessarily, but Patagonia, I'm always sort of very conflicted about that. My partner loves to go hiking, so he buys a lot of Patagonia kit. I think he also likes to look hip, so two birds, one stone. But he buys a lot of Patagonia, and he tells me all the time, I would rather buy Patagonia than say North Face or some other sports brand, because they plant a tree every time I buy a coat, or all of the down in their sleeping bags is made from, I don't know, fair trade geese who are killed before they have their feathers plucked, whatever. And I think that's a really big part of why he goes to that brand. But I'm always very suspicious about how much money Patagonia are making as a result of making that decision. Do they make that decision to make more money, or do they make that decision because it's the right thing to do? And I think until we get to the bottom of that, it's going to be very difficult to, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Is the social change a result of a desire for social change, or is it as a result of making money? And does it matter?
Well, but social ventures are for profit. They should be. It doesn't mean that they are only focused on earning money, but someone has to pay for the bills, and then they have to provide return to their investors. The difference with any other company, and I don't know if Patagonia is a social venture, probably not, but the difference with any other company is that investors expect some return, economical financial return, let's say 7% instead of a 15, and the rest will be in social benefits. So they want to see the value of in society. So there are tools to quantify that and so on, and they're improving. But I think the context of for example, in Keep It Human is not just become another charity. With all due respect, I mean, they're fantastic. We want to create a social venture. We're a social venture that wants to have an economical return, is to be able to continue our mission, but then return also in terms of social benefits, so that the investors could say, these guys are doing great, and also I can see why it's important for them to exist. So is this sort of a fragile, thin line where you sort of become one thing or the other one? But I see no conflict. I mean, I can see the two things working together quite nicely. Because if everybody benefits, I mean, who cares in the end? Unless the company is, an undesirable partner, then I'm sure you choose your partners very carefully. I think Manos is asking, ultimately, it comes down to how you quantify social impact, no? Yeah.
So would you like to have a 5-minute break and come back, or you would like to continue?
I do just want to add one comment. After looking into and listening about Alipay and how it gives the user the opportunity to make all these little changes and report them to the app, I think one of the things that we'll begin to see as this becomes more common practice is a more bottom-up approach, because that gives the user the opportunity to say, I want this incentive money or points or whatever to be used toward this kind of tree or this kind of tree, which is great in like a micro sense of, oh, well, they can choose what kind of tree. But as time goes on, that might turn into, well, I want to support, this social cause or this social cause or this social cause. And then as larger companies do it and more companies do it, we can start to get that data together and start to get a sense of what users and average people care about, what they're aware of being an issue, and what people want to see change the most. And I think that's going to kind of revolutionize a lot of different businesses. And I guess to answer the problem about where the money's coming from, that also encourages transparency in how these businesses use those profits and use those donations. And I think it could open up a new different area where the user and the everyday person has a lot more impact than they do now.
Because Alan, in the video game industry, you mentioned Steam, but also Humble Bundle is kind of a bundle of games where you can buy and play. They also have a financial model to help charities, right? But you cannot choose. So you pay for, I don't know, $25 for a bundle of games, and then you can decide how much it goes to a charity, up to a certain cap, I think. But you cannot decide where it goes, right? So they have a monthly charity, is that right? Or Josh, maybe Alan, Josh? How does it work?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
No, I was going to say, I believe that's how it works. There's like sliders, and then you can pick how much goes to whatever charity, how much is given to Humble Bundle, and how much goes back to the devs. I know, but although I do know that they tried to change that recently, but I don't know if they then went back on the changes they were introducing to that.
Can you choose the charity? That was my question. Or they have a monthly allocation, like?
I think it's a monthly allocation. I think it depends on the bundle. I think some bundles are specifically for some charities, whereas others, I think it is. I feel like they do tell you what charities they go to, but sometimes it'll be multiple charities, and I guess it'll be split between the multiple charities. It'll depend on what the Humble Bundle is about, because they run like 6 or 7 usually at once. So I think there are various little factors towards it.
And what other examples have you seen, Aline? Because I think you wrote about it when you made the review of Timmy World a while ago. It was like Jagex, or Sky, Children of Light, I think, as well.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?
Yes, that other models of financing charity causes through video gaming.
Oh yeah, so right now the most common way that charities
Twitch.
are funded in the video game world is with Twitch, where streamers will stream a popular game and watch viewers will donate however much they choose to donate, and that's kind of like industry standard right now. So I think as the video game industry progresses and as we use ideas from things like these conferences, we can integrate ideas like with what Alipay did and give the player more of a choice of what kind of charities they would like to see or what activities they would like to benefit. So I think that would be a really great thing to see develop in the video game industry.
I think giving people choice and also just letting people know that what they're doing is actually making a difference. I think that's a big thing, like that sort of transparency. I think the one thing I quite liked on that Alipay video and what we discussed was the satellite image of the trees that you donate to, because it's sort of, if I was someone doing all of this energy and trying to grow trees and deciding what trees, I'd like to actually see the tree that I grow so that I know that what the money I've raised has actually impacted something. Because I feel like with a lot of charities, at least back in the day, it's sort of you have to take them at their word that the money is going to be going to the actual charity itself. And with so many horror stories, even if it's the minor part of it, like even if it's still the loud minority of charities, the ones that end up on the news for a scandal or something that will then ultimately push people away from trusting charities. So using technology, using this like digital to give the donator like actual evidence that their money is going towards protecting the environment in this case, I think is a big encourager for people to keep doing it and keep donating.
Absolutely. It adds that layer of accountability and transparency that I think we're going to start to see be more prevalent.
Yeah.
I was wondering, how in Olympias the money travels, what sort of role it plays. It's just simply like, you get these musical lessons and then you just pay online, or do you have any other means for making something more creative in that respect, like crowdfunding, or I don't know?
So everything that we do is free. So everything that all of our music lessons, all of our events, we never charge. One of the things that we're doing next year, with the help of the Arts Council, is trialing a pay-as-you-decide basis, which is a really interesting kind of thing for us, because we don't know how much people are willing to pay. And I think one of the things that can be quite challenging is certainly a community music setting, particularly also in the setting when you're trying to champion particular kinds of music, professional musicians who are from underrepresented backgrounds. So one of the things that we're doing an awful lot of work around South Asian classical music next year, is that people like Home or Manchester International Festival will automatically will say that ticket is £5, and so automatically you give the quality, you kind of give the audience a feeling like this is just a free, it's not a very good event basically, which isn't true, but they're trying to sort of get people to come along. So basically, to answer your question, that the way the money travels is that we do a lot of kind of focus groups, feedback groups with our communities. They tell us what they want. We write to the Arts Council, whoever it is, we raise the money, we put the event on, they come, and there's no exchange of money because they don't ever have to give us any. But next year, what might happen, and again, I think just because of the kind of communities we work with, cash is really important. People paying in cash, they understand what it is. They always have some in their pocket. They may not know how to use their phone. Bank cards and things are a bit terrifying. I mean, even the sort of act of sort of putting your phone on like one of those machines, I think there's a lot of people in our communities who would feel a bit worried about doing that. I don't think they would even download an online pay app on their phone. So as to how we actually do that is another question, but does that kind of answer your question?
I think so, but also raises another one, which is you were discussing that public funding is an important part of how do you finance your foundation. But at the same time, you were saying, well, they have an agenda as well. So maybe you don't want to rely 100% of public funding, especially these days that are struggling after COVID. Not Arts Council, any public funding is really on their knees. this year, probably in the next few years as well. So I wonder how do you see these ideas coming from, especially coming from video gaming and from fintech people here, possibly disrupting or maybe bringing some new ideas for proxies. I know you already have proxies that want to donate specific, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 for specific projects. How would you chip in to people that maybe they will not give you 10,000, but they will give you 5, they will give you 10. And it's not just the usual crowdfunding, because this already exists. So because crowdfunding is great, but it's very exhausting. It's kind of a big job. We've done a GoFundMe campaign. It's massively demanding, and it's very uncertain as well. So imagine to have this sort of financial engine that provides alternative income because people simply like what you do, and they want to help these communities that may not have access to musical lessons.
No, I definitely think that's one of the big challenges, and I think that's completely right. It is extremely precarious for arts organizations because we're relying on a government agenda to say this is valuable, we'll pay for it. And if you just sort of wait every April for the budget and see how much they're willing to actually put towards, say, arts and education. So I completely see that. And I think that what you've done with Timbila is absolutely fantastic, really amazing kind of model for, replicable model for a lot of social enterprises and charities to work collaboratively like that. And I think one of the things to say as well, one of the, real attractions of a model of working where, say, video gaming is producing profits that can be put, obviously paying everybody's bills, but is also a portion of which is going towards social enterprises, that development is very expensive. So as in for a charity, fundraising is, for every development manager that we have, they can maybe raise 4 times their salary, but as you grow, you need more of them. And when you're trying to, say someone's on £25,000 a year, that person can, if they're very good, will maybe raise £100,000. But then £25,000 of that is going to them. You've got £75,000 to run your project and pay for everything else and do PAYE and all the rest of it. So, it's very attractive to charities and social enterprises. I think maybe one of the things that we struggle with in the charity sector a bit is that we are terribly hand to mouth. And I think that as a group of people, we tend to be quite suspicious of things that of profit making organizations, which is wrong, because it's not. I think it's just the nature of how we work and how that we have been on our knees for such a long time now because we are so dependent on grant funding. So I think that innovations that move more towards finding a way for companies, whether that's in fintech or video gaming or Amazon, Alibaba, that are they're working collaboratively with social enterprises and sharing resources is fantastic and takes a lot of pressure off the charity sector to do all of that change on our own. Basically, well done, everyone.
So I wonder, Adriana, we should maybe try to put a case together very quickly, just to see, I don't know, whether we can experiment.
Yes, very into the conversation.
So I was meant to, at this stage, open Keynote, because I don't really have a proper board here. I think Keynote is probably a good one. And I probably need to share the screen. So I was just thinking about a very simple, let me see if I can share first. Desktop one. And this one. Yeah, I don't know, you can see it, can you? No? Share screen, try again. Share. What about now?
Yeah, it's working.
Yep, can see it now.
You can also see my email probably open. So the idea was simply just to create a very simple chart here with a problem that we want to identify and maybe try to get to the solution. I prepared just a very simple diagram of Timby World that Aline mentioned. Timby World is basically a prototype game that we did as part of Keep It Human during the accelerator. And the challenge was to identify a very small charity we could work with, identify a very clear problem, and then find the mechanisms not just to change or create awareness, but actually have an impact in the real world. So imagine Unforest at very small scale. Okay, that was what we were trying to do. So the way it works that you enter in this small African island where there are a lot of musical instruments that look like a marimba, like a vibraphone. You play to earn musical currency. It's a multiplayer game, so you can play with friends. And then when with the things you're collecting, this energy, you can just go to the bar, either choose a non-alcoholic drink or maybe buy a skateboard. If you do the latter, you get the skateboard. We are helping us to send a real skateboard to Maputo Skate in Mozambique. So the app was meant to celebrate African culture at the same time as helping kids in Maputo that maybe because they were not skating or they were doing something else, maybe not good things, maybe involved with troubles, gangs, who knows. By getting into this education program with sports, they will do. We will help them to maybe leave these circles of problems and just join. Keep it. The skate park in Maputo Skate, and enter in the education program. It's not just about skating, but then they have this wonderful park. So that was basically the idea. The economic model was very simple. And then I know you're always going to ask who paid for the skates. Okay, so then we have proxies paying for the skates as one of the formulas we were looking at. So we created this parallel campaign in GoFundMe. And I know Aline knows more than I do about this because she already wrote about it in one of her articles. But basically the proxies were paying for the skates that we were sending. We were like 10 educational packs. And then the question was whether we will give it to the kids directly or we will lend it to or send it to the charity for them to hire or to provide the students at specific times. We were advised to do the latter, so just in case they have a temptation to put the skateboard on eBay the day after and sell it. So we were providing this, and they have it then on a rental basis. It's free to rent, but you have to complete part of the education program, and then you go to the skate, and then one skate can serve almost like 100 students in a day or two. So it's very well used, and also the questions arise about skates get broken and they have to repair them, and but also opportunities about let's create a workshop when people can learn to spray or do graffitis on skateboards like the one I have behind me. So that was the idea. So the proposal was to say, can we identify a problem that we can solve, and if so, what problem that might be, even if it's a fictional problem, and see how can we chip in to divert thinking in terms of our different expertises, and see whether we can reach the solution as Unforest did, or we very mostly did also. One of the examples I found, well, I will not talk about this yet, so I think it's probably best to get the ball rolling here and see if we can find any ideas, any comments, any thoughts. So let's start with the problem. Let's go back to the notes where people say what kind of things they're worried about. I lost my Zoom session, so I cannot see you now. Oh, here they are. Anything you want to solve today? Any problems like clean water in the world, or something we can do in half an hour?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Okay. More specifically, so you say
Making healthcare available to everyone at a baseline.
it sounds more like an American issue, right?
Maybe.
Well, maybe in other countries as well, of course. Available. So universal, let's say universal healthcare, right? It's a very big aim. I always felt that when we think about keep it human, when I had these conversations with Adriana many times, when we think about poverty, we should not think in terms of poverty, but extreme poverty. Because if we find the mechanisms to help those who actually they are outcasted, the ones that nobody really reach, then we might be in the position, if we fail a little bit, maybe help the next ones, and maybe build the foundation, the next one down the ladder. I mean, and maybe get the foundations for us to try and again. That was universal.
I think one of the things to consider as well is who is delivering this, because I mean, I suppose what this is at the moment is a way of fundraising, right? It's about a way of translating.
So who is delivering this? Is that what you're saying?
If you were to just give that money to the NHS, yeah, I think I think it's just, if you so universal healthcare, for instance, if there isn't a mechanism for successfully administering that, then it's like the vaccine, isn't it? If you've got, it depends very much on who's delivering the vaccine program.
Okay, so
Boris managed it, but
obviously I only trace this straight line from the universal care, but what you're saying is fantastic, because we can start adding questions and things to be considered. Hopefully we might be able to populate the chart more meaningfully at the end of the session.
What I'm saying though is that if we're really, if it's just a straight line, are we also talking about infrastructure? Are we talking about building an entire new organization which delivers universal health care? Are we talking about directing funds from the social innovation towards an organization who's then going to deliver the solution? Is there someone who has the solution, basically?
Maybe I get rid of the straight line, because I know it's going to be like a bit of a long walk. So at the minute we have identified the problem, we want to provide universal healthcare, not only to people in the US, but universal healthcare in especially countries that need it most. They don't have access to vaccines today, or but I would say even basic access to health support. So what else we should consider then?
I think one thing to consider is that we'd have to find a set of doctors or volunteers or educators willing to go to these places to make that impact. So we'd have to find the manpower to do that. So who is delivering? Delivering as in delivering the aid or delivering the funds?
So like a qualified team in the field. So imagine we were to... Whereabouts would you like to implement healthcare in any country in particular?
I mean, I guess we can use India as an example, where they had a huge surge with their COVID cases.
Possibly, yes.
Just use that as this small example.
Bangladesh as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because India, Brazil, and all these sort of BRICS countries, they're very developed in some aspects. The economy, I know the economy in India has been sort of slowing down a little bit, but it has been very, very successful in the last few years. The predictions they did, obviously, they came down. But on the other hand, and I tell you first person, because I visited the country in 1995, and it was one of the reasons why I quit my job, because I was working in industry before, and then when we visited India, we traveled all the north, from Delhi to Rajasthan and back, then Nepal and so on. And I learned so many things that I realized that to start, for example, I didn't need anything I had that I thought I needed before. So it was a life changer, including my job. And then I said that, you only live once. So what's the point of, trying to fulfill your dreams? And I got a flight and went to UK in the mid-90s to start with music, which is what I wanted to do. as a trained economist. So we got India, we got universal healthcare. Can you tell us a little bit the situation in India, Mayur? Do you know much about what's going on? We could refine the problem. For example, we cannot solve the entire healthcare system, but maybe we might be able to apply a specific solution for something that's more accessible.
So, if you want to compare India with, for example, UK, Canada, or US in terms of healthcare, I would say the problem has two aspects. One is the rural areas where you need actually qualified team on the field. But then there are urban areas where you have world-class hospitals. Many Western countries travel to get the treatments in India also. But there the problem is different, where people might not have enough resources to fund their healthcare expenses, right? So the problem is twofold. It's the remote areas in India where you might not have qualified people, but at the same time, the urban areas where there are qualified people, but probably the general population might not be equipped or might not have financial resources to make payments for those healthcare expenses.
So in the rural areas, not qualified people, not qualified doctors or nurses.
So one thing that India does actually is that whoever, for example, the medical professionals, the doctors who pass out recently from their institutes, if they want to work for the government, they need to serve at least 2 or 3 years in the rural areas before they can establish their own clinics or work for the hospitals and other healthcare facilities in the urban area. So that is one thing that government has implemented there, but not many of them actually work in the government organizations, right? So that partly solves the problem, but the problem is much bigger than that.
But then the people can't pay services in urban areas. Not all of them, but probably a majority.
Yes.
And also in rural areas, they can pay data, right?
Yeah. True.
So it's not just for one; it will be like more closer to this one. So both of them. Okay, so the problem is more specific. It's about resources, qualified resources, but also accessibility to why people can pay for. I mean, medical services are not accessible to anyone, like who works, or like in healthcare systems in Europe, for example.
Yeah. So, for example, if you think of UK, so no matter how many times I visit a clinic, I don't need to pay. The healthcare is covered. But that's not the case in India, right? So there is no universal healthcare in India. It's every time you visit a healthcare service, you need to pay. So
right.
There are advantages also, like if you want to get a specific surgery, you never are in a queue. You almost always get the treatment done immediately if you pay for it.
Okay, so yes, it's kind of private health services. Yeah.
Correct.
I think in Europe also it's the same case. So you have a healthcare, private healthcare, because actually my family, my elder sister works for one of these large organizations. Used to be in Bupa for 20 years, which is Sanitas in Spain. And also my brother is a doctor, my father was a doctor. So, okay, so have identified the main problem. We know now that it's just in specific area, so it's not just all around the world, but maybe with this case we can extrapolate. Then it doesn't have universal healthcare, which is India. And we have identified that within different urban environments, they have different needs. So in rural areas, they are like totally cast out because they don't have qualified doctors to attend them. And even if they have the resources, they probably have to go back to the city. And they don't have the economical resources to pay for the medical services in urban areas. So from now we need foundation charity expert, so how do you see the picture so far? First of all, I mean, I see like it's too big a problem. We cannot solve this problem with our team. But can we? How would you go about it if you were sort of attempt something like that with a charity of the scale of yours? How would you start?
I think the first part is, oh, sorry.
Sorry, go on, Alan.
Oh, just getting people's interest. That's what I was going to say is probably one of the most important things, just getting people to care and want to contribute to this cause.
So one of the things we could start thinking is, first of all, creating awareness of that problem. Because maybe the aid doesn't come from the country itself, it could come from elsewhere. Creating awareness, creating international awareness.
And I think that can connect with some of the ideas that Josh was telling in the beginning. Simple behaviors that people can change when you create awareness and can make a difference, perhaps little actions.
Okay, so how would you create awareness?
I wonder if maybe I'm jumping a couple of steps ahead here.
Yeah.
I think partly, I think ultimately all of these activities, all of these social innovation activities, fundraising activities, you're doing one thing. The thing that they all have in common is you're trying to redistribute funds from people who have quite a lot to people who don't have enough, right? So, looking at, try and identify who those groups of people are. So either it's the government. So the government has money and we're trying to redistribute the money to the places it should be going. Rather than maybe moving money away from military and putting it towards healthcare. If you're looking at a more kind of company-based model, maybe in this case, just looking at the diagram here, maybe it's the people who can pay for services. So the people who are going to hospitals and paying for private care and say, having really, really top quality, no queuing in ER, going straight through and having the surgery they need. So maybe it's a case of trying to redistribute the wealth from the people who can pay for it. And maybe they're using an app, they're using a service. When they go and pay for their operation, or I don't know, have their verruca taken off, but they are also putting a portion of them, they're also given the opportunity to be made aware of people who don't get to pay for that in a rural place where there's not a hospital or there's no qualified doctors, and then an opportunity to also help change the problem by putting a portion, donating money to someone who could use universal healthcare, but pay for someone else who needs that treatment but couldn't pay for it. If that makes sense.
You're already finding the solution. You're sort of getting the redistribution of wealth through this portion that this part of the cake that you take from the rich and then put in the poor. Sort of finding the solution there. But is it that simple? Who will if imagine who gets these payments when, for example, it could be the government or
which is why it's the who is delivering question again. So
okay,
you've got your money, and then who do you give the money to, and who's going to deliver that service. So, I mean, to give you just a very sort of brain party example. So you've got your universal healthcare problem. The next thing is saying that, I suppose, creating awareness. And I feel that in the example, it's just an example, but say that you identify that the patients who are paying for it as the people you're going to get your money from, they're the people who are going to donate. They're a particularly good group of people to try and create awareness from, because they probably have a specific empathy, because they're in hospital at that very point, right? So they understand what it is to be suffering or to be ill. And then to try and get them to understand what it would be like to be ill and then not have the means to pay for it. They're a very good group of people to be petitioning for support, because one, they have the money, and two, they understand the problem. And three, you have a captive audience because they're in hospital. So then the one that has to come before the solution, the circle, is the who is delivering. And I feel like that's a really, really important question, because if, it could be that it goes to a government body and then you don't know how much of that's going to middle management and how much of that is actually going to, say, a doctor. I mean, who's deciding what the money needs to be spent on? Because that's another issue too, isn't it? Is it infrastructure money? Are we talking, do we only care if the money is being spent specifically on the surgery? Or does it matter that we're also paying for like beds, or paying? It's not very sexy, is it, to say, right, thanks for your £10,000 that you've given us, we spend it on I don't know, those like plastic gloves that doctors have to be essential, but not sexy to have to pay for that, right? So I think that's really an important question: who's delivering, and then who's deciding what the priority is for that to be spent on in order to address the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just trying to follow you. You're going very fast. So basically, we're sort of saying that, if I can understand what you just said, in terms of, you started with the redistribution of wealth, right? So we know that the money is there, it just needs to be reallocated. And they already provided a solution, taking a part of the portion of the cake and then give it to those who need it more. But then, first of all, we need to identify who the donors are, who is the people with the money, who will be willing to pay for these services and give part of it if they have the choice. Or maybe philanthropists that want to help people directly, even if they don't go through the system. And then we already have identified the beneficiaries. I think Mayur already gave us a little bit of a clue about who could benefit, and not in great detail, but we know that we could refine that question. Maybe we don't have time now. And then the other question is, who is delivering this? Because I think this is the most important part. If it's the normal banking, going back to the early disruptions, I think it was Josh suggesting that. So normal banking has been doing the same thing over and over for many years. But if we're someone to disrupt the market, maybe they may provide a medical solution that is not just a private care company, but also someone that that if you join them, part of what you pay, you won't pay more, but part of what you pay will help to all these people that will not pay. So the question will be, how will you create awareness of that system, that financial service that is in between the donor and the beneficiary? Because who is delivering? Is that what you mean? Or do you mean delivering the help, like the doctors going in to help these people? Who is delivering the message? Who is delivering?
I'll give you an example. So, with Timbila, you were both the person who was, you basically, there's only one person doing the whole food chain, and it's Keep It Human, right? So you're the one who's creating awareness, you're the one who's raising the money, you're the one who's, and then you're the one who's also delivering it, and that you're giving them, well, actually, no, you're not, it's Maputo, isn't it? It's Maputo.
Yes, Maputo is delivering it.
So I suppose it's trying to identify who's the Maputo in your other model. So is it like Medicine Sans Frontiers? Are you going to identify a local rural hospital who's going to deliver that? And then once you've got that, you have to identify, and I think this is very context specific, what the need is for that organization. Because a place like Maputo, they already have a skate park. So you don't need to spend money to build one. You just need to spend money on skateboards, right? But, for a group like the Olympias Music Foundation, for us, one of the thing which is really kind of, that we have to think very, very carefully about at the moment as we grow as an organization is core costs. And so, a lot of the money that we raise when we write for funding, a very large portion of that is going towards our rent. It's not actually going towards music lessons, but without having the building, we can't deliver the music lessons. Do you see what I mean?
So you're talking about infrastructure. In fact, you started with infrastructure at the very beginning.
But if you have an organization who are delivering it already, you don't need an infrastructure. So I think it's, when you talk about universal healthcare, perhaps part of it is digging down deep into what specific part of the healthcare you're trying to provide. Is it to do with building a hospital from scratch, or is it about a hospital that doesn't have the capacity to deliver services for patients?
I know, but when we were looking at infrastructure, by the way, it was Maputo Skate was built, but it was a completely different project. Skaters of the world. The cost of the infrastructure, normally imagine a park in Manchester. Okay, so you build a park and it's like, I don't know, 100,000 euro, for example. This is just 1/15th part of the cost of maintenance of the park in the next 10 years. Meaning that someone has to go there and clean it, someone has to empty the bins and repair the things and take care of the trees. So infrastructure is not just the physical asset that you plant there, it's also maintenance. So hospitals are not just about the infrastructure. Studios is not about just buying the bricks and the computers. We need to have a rolling budget, as we do. Every 5 years, we need to change computers. Things get broken. So this is the hardest part, because you may convince the donors that a part of their money goes directly to the beneficiary. How would you convince donors, or what donors will be willing to pay for that infrastructure to exist? So, and normally it will be like this Arts Council, this organization that you can demonstrate the value, not of the park itself, of the system that you are providing. But this is from someone that has been in the space for 1 year, so I don't really have much of a clue of whether what I'm talking is real or not. So, but any other questions? Any other comments from? Because now, for example, we can see the power of young people and video gaming through Alin, perhaps to say, listen, we could have a say about that. We don't need to rely on the government. What if we build an experience that works somehow in this context? And then we move to the fintech people to see, they have a clue for unlocking the mystery there, the finance. It's always the most important. So, Alin, how will you empower a young generation of gamers to unlock this problem? Do you think there's a possibility there? Because they probably care about these things.
I think for video gaming, I'm also going to tie in the healthcare industry, just simply because of the example we use, where the patient who's going to pay their bills sees that a portion of it goes, so they are directly emotionally and socially connected to that event. So I think that would probably make a little bit more of a stronger impact on people paying for healthcare versus a person playing a video game. And I think in either of those situations, giving the person that human experience of having an impact on this situation will be key for it growing in the industry. Like, for instance, if healthcare providers in the States, Canada, whatever countries that have decent healthcare implement a system where a portion of the proceeds from their business go to a hospital or healthcare facility in India, for instance. I think a good way to get a little bit more fuel into that process would be to directly involve the patient and even give them an option to be like, look, if you donate $1, the hospital will match that 2 to 1, and then you can choose where that goes. So I think a big part of that is bringing the sense of connection from the people who are giving the money, which in this case would be, the hospital and the patient paying. Once that's in place, then I think the element of transparency is going to become more important with companies, because they're going to have to get the word out that, hey, we're doing this, we're making this impact, and that's why you should choose our service as opposed to, another clinic or facility that might not be doing these things. So I think that would be like a whole PR issue as well, to start making that something to focus on for medical facilities. Of course, you want to go to the best care you can find, but also, if you're choosing between a family doctor that has great ratings and does not give back in that way versus another doctor who has similar ratings, and on their website they're like, oh, well, here's what we do with some of our funds, and also we match any donations that you might make in this way, and you can keep track of it either with your app or on the website like Alipay does.
I've got a suggestion. And again, I might be jumping the gun here, but just going back to video gaming, a long time ago, when I was a kid, I'm just going to put it in the chat. I used to play a game on Nintendo DS. Does anybody remember those? The Game Boy where you really... Anyway, it was called, it just made me think, it was called Under the Knife, and it was a game where you pretended to be a doctor and you had to sort of do surgeries and stuff. And I was just thinking, that you could do, again, sort of thinking about like killing 2 birds with 1 stone here. In order to sort of develop that empathy and things, what if it's maybe not like a role play game like this, it's a bit it's very relevant, it's about a virus that takes over the world. Anyway, but essentially, what about a game in which that person going through the game had to experience what it was like to not be able to access a hospital? or maybe a game, in fact, where doctors had to do difficult tasks, whichever one it is. And so on one hand, you're building empathy, and then on another hand, you also have an opportunity to donate money as you go through the game. These are all the different things that you might experience if you were this person. So it's a role play game, but you're role playing being the person who's ill, which you understand already because you're in hospital. Maybe you're in the waiting room. Maybe it's a game you can play when you're in the waiting room. And again, captive audience. But then as you play the game, you experience sort of the flip side of what it would be like to be the person who's ill but can't afford to pay. And so, I don't know, you go and maybe it's surgeries that go wrong because there isn't sufficient hygiene, or there isn't enough beds, and so you're having to do a surgery on the floor or whatever. And so at the end of each game, I mean, it's kind of built into the game, but you always fail.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and then what about if, as well as sort of going through that sort of experience, that then ties, what if the game were to be actual built on actual real life people? So okay, so you failed the surgery, but actually this is a real story about a real person. So once you've failed, you actually watch a video, or you read a story, a news story perhaps, or maybe one that's drawn from the hospital that you're working with, the group that you're working with, where that person talks to you about how they lost their child, or about how they had to have their leg amputated. And so again, you're engaging with a real issue here, and then you have an opportunity to make a donation. And it could be that you buy in the game, you buy whatever it is, however many scalpels, or you buy a new ventilator, however much you want to donate, and that becomes a real thing that hospital then receives. Do you see what I mean? So maybe, and it could be, a bit like the Alipay thing, that once they buy it, to get around this issue of core cost, nobody wants to pay for core costs, nobody wants to pay for salaries, nobody wants to pay for electricity. It's boring. But once they buy the ventilator, because that's what they've identified they need, you get a photograph of it. Something like that. Sorry, jumping the gun, but something like
that. I think making the gamifying part of this something that can relate to the actual thing that's being donated to is like an absolute must, because you want people to empathize with the people receiving the donation. There is an element of obviously putting people in their shoes, but you also what the Alipay one does, where you're essentially collecting energy that will help the trees grow, and then this relates to actually planting a tree and having that grow. I think the gamifying element of this should be something where the person donating feels like they're actually like making the thing that they'll be donating to. The idea of showing them, the bad side of things. Like what people are suffering through, literally putting someone in that person's shoes is one way of doing it. I think another way of doing it, if let's use vaccines, for example, it could be something where the game element of it is actually making the vaccine through whatever method we use to keep people coming back. And then once the vaccine is completed, that's like you've essentially paid for someone to have a vaccine there by actually making it in-game. Like doing a method, something similar to like that.
Listen, just to clarify one thing, we are not trying to build our next game, right?
Yeah.
So trying to figure out whether a group with different diversity of approaches to, but sensibilities as well to the problem could get together to find something and some mechanisms to solve these issues and at least get closer to the solution. One thing that I will highlight from both Aline and Josh is that this idea of connecting the donors and the beneficiaries, and you I think also suggested it, is extremely important. Close that gap. Sometimes you go to these, concerts online, musical concerts, like the next Lady Gaga big thing, that raise a lot of money. You don't even know where this money is going. It goes to this thing, fantastic. Who benefited from it? So you need, and there are some other charities that you say, listen, you give me £15 and I give it to Peter, Pablo, because he needs a new shelter or a new roof or a new, code to make a job interview. The other thing that I will highlight, for me is mind blowing when you just say, because you just hit the stone of the big question here. What is collaborative gaming? Most collaborative gaming is multiplayer gaming is collaborative. So these two people have to open that door and they cannot open the door on their own. So you build this engine where people get together because otherwise they can't progress in the game. But they have a personal interest into that. When you're describing here, you say the word building empathy. This is an emotional engine. It's nothing to do with collaboration. It's more about empathy. It's putting yourself in the place of others. And I think the masters of that are that game company, the guys who did Journey and so on. And they experimented with this new engine in a game called Sky, Children of Light, where you are rewarded if you spend time with the other. And they had the mechanisms to avoid cheating in terms of you have to spend a lot of time. You have to help the other. And then you cannot reward yourself. You have to reward those who have helped you. So the question here is, if you were to create this empathy, create the message, and connect the donors with the beneficiaries, you need to build some sort of emotional engine, which is very difficult. What they did is brilliant, and I think they created this lotus flower that you buy in a specific week for $1, and they donated this to Doctors Without Borders. It was like $1 million within the game engine with micropayments. That's a step beyond what I've seen before, compared to the other formulas. And we didn't do that in Timby World. The question is here, how would you create an emotional engine with all these financial resources in micropayments, not to connect two guys that never met before, like today we in the game, but connect the donor and the beneficiary? When you know that the beneficiary is these people in the rural area that not only not have access to qualified doctors and healthcare and the monies to pay for it, they don't even have access to the internet. They don't have access to anything. They're just dying. So how would you connect these two things? Because through technology, it's not possible. I think the video game, the technology doesn't reach there. So meaning that it's a much harder problem to solve than the one we anticipated in Keep It Human. And that's why we say, well, Aren is very important. He represents all this sort of indie community. You're the charity person, the one that really understands how this works, what sort of donors care about, the beneficiaries. But I think you also and Mayur have this key to unlock the solution, because maybe the finance services we are describing here, they don't exist yet. They have to be designed. Maybe they need machine learning to understand the problem. I don't know.
So I do have one recommendation is so what can be done is, for example, an app can be developed and it has to be done through hospitals, as you were saying, right? So for example, if we can get some hospitals on board with this idea of participating in this scheme, and then if we can develop an app where people who are availing healthcare services from, for example, a particular hospital, the patients, if they wish, what the hospital can do is they can allocate them a token or a digital currency which will stay in their wallets, which they can spend in future whenever the need arises. So the hospital would be owning the currency. I mean, the token would be with the person who recently got served and who has excess money to donate. And it will only be spent when the hospital actually faces a situation when there is a patient who needs care but doesn't have money to pay, and the person who is owning the currency has a right, to be able to spend it on that particular case. So this will give a perfect closure to the person where the money is actually going, and a set of control or on where the money is actually going and where are they spending. And it might be possible that the surgery or the treatment, the cost might be higher than one person's currency budget, where 2 or 3 people can be, the wallets and the tokens can be combined to pay for it. So what I'm saying is hospitals would only be, I mean, the same hospital will be offering the service, so they will be actively involved. At the same time, the donors are not just giving the money when when they got treated, but they still have the right over the money where they want to spend. And in future, when the actual money is being spent, it's only when it goes from their wallet to the specific person, which comes in the future. So that was one thing I was thinking. Another thing I was thinking is, so in India, I mean, most people who have money, they would have healthcare insurance. And every time they need to avail healthcare, a large part of it would be covered by the insurance. And that is another instance where you can ask them to pay a part of the cover they got from insurance for the future patients who need money, who do not have insurance, right? So that's another way to ask for money when they are actually not paying. Yeah, the cost is being covered, but then we might invoke that empathy for others who do not have insurance to pay for it.
Adriana, I don't know if you want to take control of the situation here, tell us where we are, because I think we haven't solved the world problems in healthcare, universal healthcare, but we have advanced with some potential ideas and solutions as the kickoff for a conversation that could go in many different directions. But I think we have identified quite a few things, quite a few issues, and maybe advance some of the potential solutions. If we were to put a team together that understands about indie games, about fintech, about social responsibility, about charity world, because this is what we were aiming here, just to get the ball started to see whether a potential solution to a very complex problem is possible, and if not, what problems we might be able to solve as a team, and what resources we will need to scale them. So maybe you want to, unless anyone has anything to say, just continue with whatever we have in the agenda. I totally forgot. Maybe we're close to 2 hours, right? So almost 2 hours and 5 minutes.
Yeah, so you would like to mention some takeaways, perhaps what opportunities has the workshop helped you identify, and which tools holds the great potential to contribute to social innovation initiatives?
So let's start with the takeaways. Getting hungry now.
So who would like to start?
I think a big takeaway that I got from this is really that connection from the user, whether it's a financial app, a video game, or whatever it might be, is making that connection and giving that spark of interest to make a change. Like, I think that's a core concept for all of this here. Let's see. And of course, creating the infrastructure from it. It's interesting. I think a lot of what we talked about comes to the idea of globalization and companies and apps coming together and realizing that there's a lot more to being a successful company than just straight profits. It's involving people. It's making people care about the rest of the world and bringing these issues to light. So I don't know, it's got me thinking of all these different ways to do that in the gaming world. I mean, even just the example that Joe gave about the medical game is fantastic. I love it. So that's what's sticking with me right now. I've got a lot of ideas percolating, but I don't want to ramble on too much.
Who's the next victim? Josh, perhaps?
I'm just trying to think. I think one of the key takeaways I've sort of got from this kind of comes back around to this visibility angle, that if you want people to donate then you need to sort of give them the visibility that what they're doing, they know what the donations are going for, that they know that what they're doing is making a positive change and is actually sort of being used, because I think you need to be able to motivate people to make these changes. You want to motivate people to donate and support various charities, and through gamifying it is obviously a key part of that. But so is introducing the visibility that the money that they'll be, whether or not they're spending it, how are they spending it? Is it through, like with the Alipay one, just their everyday sort of payments of going through it, and a percentage of that is being taken into this gamified element to make the trees. And in the sort of example that we've done, how whether it's through direct donations or other means, I think sort of identifying that and identifying the motivation are like the two key things, two key takeaways that need to be established if we want to sort of get a charity app like this sort of rolling. I think that those are the things that I'm sort of thinking about in my mind, like what are the best ways to do it? What are the how can you keep people continually wanting to donate as well, and just so you can make a difference. Really, that's just my mind is racing trying to think of the different ways that this can be established, especially with the fintech technology that we've currently got available. What would be the best solutions to implement to achieve this?
I'm thinking that, with the Alipay, the pull is that you get to see your tree growing, right? Mm-hmm. In the context of healthcare, what you get to see is that the person who, that person's illness doesn't progress. And maybe actually they get better. So maybe actually it's a case of a dialogue, in terms of showing like what it's going towards, this person thriving. I mean, with fintech as well, I wonder, maybe this is a little bit invasive and needs a bit more thought. This is just an immediate brain fart here, but what about if it was something where you could see the amount of money that was going towards their medical bills being covered, and if there was a way that you could see where the money was going to, maybe even if that person, I'm not married, but I've been to enough weddings, and people have those wedding lists where they say, oh, we're moving into our first house and we don't have a microwave. I need some forks, I need this, I need that. And so actually when you pay, you can see everyone donating towards various things that people have. This is a problem, of course, if we go back to this issue of if the people in the rural village don't have internet or a phone, then okay, we have an issue here. And this is being, who is delivering this? If it's a hospital account, perhaps, where you can see that each person, that the things are being paid for, you get a photograph of them like a couple of weeks after the surgery or something. I don't know if that maybe becomes a bit sort of terrifying, because that's maybe like a YouTube influencer thing where you can see people are getting money on Patreon and you're seeing them build their marionette that you sort of paid to sort of watch them do. But yeah, something like that. I think there is a possibility here, especially because, in this particular project, you're not talking about something very abstract. You're not talking about climate change or trees. You're talking about people, that the power of faces, and of having a child. That's very emotive, isn't it? If you're watching over the course of 5 years a child grow from being 5 to 10 and getting healthier and healthier, and not having that health problem anymore. So I think maybe that's certainly one way of making it clear, even if the money is going towards something boring, again, to go back to rubber gloves, plastic gloves, that, as a consequence of paying for all that stuff, that child, what you're paying for is the whole, isn't it? It's not that you're paying for the bills to be paid, you're paying for that child to, get over their polio in 5 years.
Yeah, you're paying for, you want the end goal to be like someone being cured of whatever disease, but obviously that's an abstract thing that you can't pay for, so you're actually paying for the tools to achieve that, and it's a way of showing both of those things into it, like how showing people the end result of what you've paid for, even if you're paying for something that's like essentially the middle part of it. You're paying for the solution, but you want to see the conclusion, basically.
I'm starting to believe that you really want to build this game. That was not the intention. because we didn't even know, we didn't even know the problem we were sort of facing with the one you wanted to choose. We just provide the open framework for the discussion. I think my takeaway is very simple. I was a bit anxious, a bit nervous about the results. We never done this before. We've done many meetings and panels in academia, of course, many years, but we never done summits. And I've been through one summit in my life, is to build a project called Virtuoso and do a pitch after that. And it was the same situation. I met people I never seen before, and they were all match made by the organization running it. So we didn't know each other, but we had things in common. We had things to share. We were overlapping, but not too much. And I think it was amazing. And as a result of this summit, we created many different projects afterwards. So the one we sold, Virtuoso, was one of them, but then we have extended that to many different areas. And we have created many different partnerships. So my takeaway is that I think I'm flattered about the early results of this. Like everybody getting it so well from the very beginning. And I think sometimes it's about chemistry. Sometimes it doesn't work, and you have to move forward. But the work that Adriana and I put together for almost a month preparing this thing, we today we have paid off, because I think it's very encouraging to see that you can have an idea and put people together to think about the hardest problem in the world, and they will not solve it in that particular time, that particular meeting, but they will advance ideas immensely. They will speed up what you can do on your own by miles, and that's my takeaway. So thank you for that, helping us to do that.
Mayur, would you like to say something?
Yes. So first of all, I would like to say I learned a lot about charities today than I learned in my life before. So thank you very much for sharing those wonderful insights. I think my takeaway is that how you can break down the problem into specific context, and then it becomes more straightforward to at least understand the problem. Because many times what happens is we talk about big abstract things, but until we contextualize them, we might not be able to solve them. So for example, I mean, when we started talking about universal healthcare today, probably it wasn't going into a specific direction, but the moment we started talking about specific India context and breaking it down even further, I think it gave us good direction to solve it. So that's one of the takeaways I have from the session.
So thank you very much, everyone. I also learned a lot from all of you, and I'm sure Ricardo and I will have a lot of conversations.
I think there's still people haven't told us about the takeaway. Is that right?
Sorry?
I think Aline hasn't
finished? No.
Everybody? Okay, so sorry.
Yeah, contributed. So thank you all for attending our call, and I hope perhaps something else later, a project or something, can come out of this. Thank you very much for coming, and see you another time.
It was great to meet everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I hope we can meet in the physical world as well at some point in the near future. Fingers crossed. Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.